it really was an exploration for me as I was writing. I felt very much like Jack and Ava are these two teenagers who really are alive somewhere, going through what they went through.
Author Cory Anderson speaks from her heart about her debut young adult novel, What Beauty There Is.
Ava's story is really dear to my heart. When I was Ava's age, I was assaulted. So much of writing the book was a journey for me of grief and making sense of my own life, because Jack and Ava's stories are just in so many ways a metaphor for me and my life.
The crime thriller takes place within Idaho's rugged terrain of the northern Rocky Mountains.
The kind of rough and tumble area where I grew up, it's wild and it's gritty. I was raised there as an outside girl, so it seemed really natural and organic to place it in a place that I knew really well. I really wanted the setting to act as an anchor for the entire mood and atmosphere of the book.
Welcome to today's author event. My name is Emily McAvoy, the Teen Services Coordinator for St. Louis County Library. Our event today is produced in partnership with HEC Media. Our event bookseller is The Novel Neighbor, an indie bookstore in Webster Groves with the best selection of young adult literature in the area. You can order a signed copy of our featured book at thenovelneighbor.com. And we so appreciate you supporting our author and our indie bookstore partner with your book purchase. Our author today is Cory Anderson. Cory is a winner of the League of Utah Writers Young Adult Novel Award and a grand prize in the Storymakers Conference First Chapter Contest. What Beauty There Is her debut novel. So Cory, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Kick us off, if you could tell us a little bit about What Beauty There Is.
Sure, I'd love to. So What Beauty There Is my debut novel. It is a young adult contemporary novel. It's kind of on the literary side. It's also a thriller about Jack and Ava, two teens caught up in a drug deal gone wrong and a deadly game of betrayal. So Jack and his little brother Maddie have nothing left except each other. Jack has CPS coming and he's worried that they're going to take Maddie away. He's really desperate and he decides that his last resort is to go after the drug money that sent his father to prison. It's the same money that his father hid somewhere before he was captured by police. And Jack meets 17-year-old Ava, who decides that she's going to help the brothers. But little do they know that she may be the one person who can lead them to more trouble. So that's a little kind of a teaser for the book.
Yeah, you don't want to give it all away.
Nope, not too much.
So, what inspired this story? Were your main characters, Jack and Ava, based on anyone from your own life?
There's kind of two answers to this question. First, I grew up on crime noir. I just love Nordic noir, American noir. My dad loved it. And so I grew up watching those kind of dark crime mysteries on television and in movies. Things like Fargo or No Country for Old Men are just stories that always captured my imagination. And I think that I'm drawn to them. They're dark, but there is always something inside of those stories that also makes me feel hopeful. And so that's one thing that inspired me, is just my love of crime noir. But on a more personal note, the book is set in Idaho, and that's where I grew up. Idaho is the home of my heart, even though I no longer live there. I was raised there as an outside girl, and I set the book there because I knew that it would be deeply meaningful to me. And I started writing What Beauty There Is about 10 years ago, at a time when I was having some struggles of my own. I had just separated from my husband, and I found myself with an empty pantry and an eviction notice, much the same way that Jack finds himself in the opening chapters of the book. And I remember feeling scared. I had a son and daughter, and I wasn't sure if I would really have a way to take care of them. So Jack's story uh, in that opening chapter of the book very much comes from the feelings that I was having with my children, feeling like I didn't know what to do next and that I needed to do something to make sure that I could keep us together. And I remember it was winter time and I had just gotten an eviction notice right before Christmas when I wrote the first chapter. It's very much the way that it is right now. So Jack is a part of me. He is inspired by that part of my life.
If you'd like to talk about Ava as well, if she's kind of a little bit you or based on anyone that you know.
Yeah, Ava's story is really dear to my heart. When I was Ava's age, I was assaulted. And so I really thought that I had developed this black heart and that I'd lost the capacity to love. And I don't want to give too much away about Ava's story, but Ava's thoughts are mine. The book is written with this narrative framework where the reader at the beginning of every chapter gets to kind of see inside Ava's thoughts. And those things that I write in Ava's point of view, her narration, it just comes from me and my innermost thoughts. And she has this arc where Ava thinks that she has developed this cold black heart, and you see that she has this black heart that she has on her wrist, a tattoo, and I have that same one. So her storyline to me is really personal, and it took me a long time to learn that it wasn't true, that I developed this cold black heart, that hard things can hurt us, but it doesn't mean we're broken. And I hope that I have weaved that into the story with Ava's story arc. So she's very much a part of me. Jack and Ava is kind of like these two pieces of me that I've brought together in the story.
You touched on it a little bit, but the story structure. So like you
Yeah.
said, Ava's story kind of starts each chapter. How did you decide that that's how you wanted to structure the book? What inspired you to do it that way?
Probably two books that I love inspired me to write Ava's narrative framework. One is No Country for Old Men by Cormac McCarthy. In that book, there is a little framework that is an italicized section at the beginning of many of the chapters where we get to hear from the sheriff, Ed Tom, and we get to kind of find out his innermost thoughts about what's going on in the story. And I really loved that. I thought that that was an integral way that Cormac McCarthy introduced Ed Tom and his thoughts. But probably even more primary of an inspiration was The Book Thief by Marcus Zuzak. So we know that in that book, Death narrates the story, and Death has this way of being boundless and being able to look at different points of view and kind of having this ability to float through the story and show all these different characters and their motivations. And I just love that so much. And I thought, well, is there a way that I can do something like that? Obviously, not with death, but with a character who also is able to kind of show the reader different parts of the story, because that character is also not limited by the human experience for one reason or another. And I won't say too much more than that, but yeah, that's where that came from.
Yeah. So switching gears a little bit, the setting in the book, it felt very much like another character when you were describing where they are, and you touched on it before that this all takes place in Idaho. What made you want to set it in the brutal winter of Idaho.
I love when people say that the setting feels like a character because that was a goal going into the story. I really wanted the setting to act as an anchor for the entire mood and atmosphere of the book. And I wanted the book to be both this stark telling of, a crime story and also kind of something that was dear to me and touching. So it seemed really natural and organic to place it in a place that I knew really well and that I knew that I could describe with a lot of detail and a kind of vividness. And winter just seemed to go hand in hand with that. The story is this kind of stark and raw story. And I felt like that the cold and the landscape of Idaho in winter would marry with that really well and serve to magnify that mood. So hopefully I accomplished that. It was really fun to do.
Yeah, you really did. It set you could almost feel it when Jack is out in the snow in different parts of the book. Like you just get that sense, just the cold and everything. So well done.
Oh, thank you. It's a great compliment because that was a goal of mine.
There are some pretty harrowing scenes in What Beauty There Is, yet ultimately it's a survival story with a lot of hope. And you've touched on that before. How did you navigate writing this often harsh reality while maintaining a sense of hope?
Oh, that is such a great question. I think this story with Jack and Dava, it's so personal to me. I think looking back, I didn't know it when I was writing the book, but so much of writing the book was a journey for me of grief and making sense of my own life because Jack and Davis stories are just in so many ways a metaphor for me and my life. And so um, I think I was pouring my heart into the pages. And when it was tough and they were at the end of their rope, I think I was probably feeling the same way and trying to find a way to make sense of the hard things that were going on for me. And not only to make sense of them, but to be able to describe them in a way that I could feel hopeful about them. And I could also feel love for the circumstances that I was in. So, yeah, I don't know. It really was an exploration for me as I was writing. I felt very much like Jack and Ava are these two teenagers who really are alive somewhere, going through what they went through, and that I was there to try to tell their story as honestly as I could.
What was your experience like from writing the story to actually getting it published?
I wrote What Beauty There Is for about 7 years. So it was a long process writing. I was working full time and raising my two children. And so I was fitting writing in late at night or on weekends. And I think in some ways that's really hard, right? You have to kind of make it work. But at the same time, it allowed me lots of time to kind of subconsciously work on the story when I wasn't actually sitting down and writing. And so and looking back, I'm really grateful that I was able to have the time to write it in the way that I did. Once I was ready, I finished it very slowly, but once I had a full draft, I went through it several times, but it didn't have a lot of major revisions. And once I was ready, I felt like, okay, it's time. I did not have contacts in the industry. I did not have any shoe in the door, but I just went the road of putting together a query letter and looking at agents online and trying to determine who might be a good fit. And then I just sent out those cold query letters. And I think I sent about 30. And within 2 weeks, I started getting responses, and eventually, my first offer of representation came just a couple weeks later. I found the agent of my dreams, Lindsay Auld, at Writer's House, who is just unbelievable. She's an editing genius, and she's so passionate and supportive, and I just feel like the luckiest person in the world to be working with her. And she took me through a great edit, gave me so much incredible insight into how to make the story even better, helped me through things, a couple of scenes in particular that I think really helped to kind of hone the story and bring it to a better place. And then we went on submission. I think it was less than 6 months from query to sale. The submission went to auction within a month, and here we are.
Sounds like it was very whirlwind.
It was. Once it started, it was very whirlwind. I just couldn't dream of working with a better group of people than my editor, Jen, and the group at Roaring Brook Press. They've just been so supportive. It certainly is true that this book has had many people who have like carried it along the way. And I just appreciate that so much.
When you started writing this story, did you always intend for it to be for a teen audience? Did you always want to write young adult literature?
So the book is, I think, maybe in some ways a little bit different than a lot of the teen literature that's really mainstream right now. And I don't think that I was writing with an eye toward, I want this to be a young adult contemporary novel. I think as I mentioned earlier, as we were talking about why I was writing, I think I was really writing to myself for the longest time. And I was writing to the teen girl that I was. It's always been this desire of my heart to be able to write those kinds of characters that would also maybe speak to another teen out there. And I think that the novel, I hope that it does that, because books changed me so much at that time. But I also know that it's different, and a lot of people kind of call it a crossover novel. I have a lot of adult readers who seem to like the story. And I mean, I think that young adult is for everyone, right? I hope that teen readers will enjoy it, but I also think, we all are that teenager in our hearts, no matter how old we get. So I just consider young adult to be ageless.
So you talked about before Marcus Zuzak. Are there any other YA writers that have been an influence on your own writing, either when you were younger or working on What Beauty There Is?
Oh, so definitely. When I was younger, probably the authors that I can just say that I read every single thing that they put out, Philip Pullman and Madeleine L'Engle, and those books, they all had actually like an element of fantasy to them. I was so in love with fantasy growing up and as a teen, and those books were really magical to me, and they inspired my love of reading. Also, more recently, things like The Hunger Games, or I just read Joan He's The Ones We're Meant to Find. Dystopian fiction and speculative fiction has always been something that I will just devour. And so, why am I writing like, really naturalistic contemporary? I have no idea. But I love those books. I think one contemporary author that I'll also mention is Laurie Sanderson. As a girl who had been through some things that she talked about in the book Speak, I was changed by reading her books. And so the ability to kind of talk about the truth in a story And my love of that comes from her.
Yeah, Laurie Sanderson, and she's the queen.
She is.
And I could see librarians and teachers giving their readers that have read your book. Like, I feel it's
Oh,
very in line with if they enjoyed her books and got something out of Laurie Sanderson, that your book would be the next one that they hand to them.
I consider that the highest compliment. So thank you. I mean, I think that uh, uh, some of the themes in What Beauty There Is that relate to kind of abuses of power with Ava's story, they're subtle, but they're there.
Mhm.
And when it's noticed, it means a lot to me. So I really appreciate that. Thanks.
You're welcome. What was the most challenging part of writing this book? And what was the easiest part to write?
It might be surprising. There are some harrowing scenes in the book. And those scenes, I think, most often were the easiest to write. I just felt that they happened really organically. I did not plot the book at all. I wrote from scene to scene in a real discovery kind of way. And it just felt like that there was this engine running. And when an action scene would come up, I would just be able to write it and it would move to the next, it would be driven by those action scenes, those kind of harrowing scenes. The thing that was probably harder were the tender moments, the moments in the book that felt slow and quiet, and that felt like that I needed to really lay myself bare and be honest. Those were the ones that I grappled with more, I think, because I so desperately wanted them to be right. So, yeah, I think those tender, heartfelt moments were the ones that I took the most time with.
Can you tell us anything about what you're doing next?
It is a little bit of a secret still because I'm still working on kind of the ins and outs of it with my editor. But I think that I will always write stories set in the Rocky Mountains, the kind of um, rough and tumble area where I grew up. It's wild and it's gritty, and it feels very much like the home of my heart. So this next book is set in the wilderness of Wyoming, and it is about a girl named Doan who is kind of living this survivalist lifestyle off the grid with her family in the wilderness. And in the neighboring town, there is a murder, and I will just leave it at that. so, so it will be another kind of a literary leaning crime story.
All right. Perfect. I can't wait to
Not
read that one.
oh, I am really excited about it. I can't wait to get it finished and into the hands of readers. I'm really hoping that people who like What Beauty There Is will like this, and that maybe I'll even find, some new readers as well.
And with writing the new book, did you follow that same path of just letting the writing take you along on its story, or did you outline this next one?
It felt so organic and natural to let the story kind of come as it would with What Beauty There Is. And I was so confident that I would be able to do that the second time around. And it has been difficult. So I am learning that there are times when it's a really good idea to stop and look forward a little bit further and try to carve out a path a little more carefully. So I'm actually brainstorming with a couple of writing friends and my editor right now to do a little bit of outlining. So I've learned, I think, that each book is different. And you have to be ready to adjust based on like how it's going and what your heart says and what the book needs. So right now I'm learning, okay, I can outline. and I think it's going to make a better book in the end.
Cory, you talked about that when you were Ava's age that you were assaulted. How did that factor into the person that you are now, and just that you are a person that has hope? And what kind of advice would you have for young women that may have also been put in that same situation?
When I was assaulted, it really changed my life. I thought that I had lost something that I would never have again. And it took a long time for me to find that hope and to believe that something that I thought was lost really wasn't. And I didn't tell anyone for the longest time. Assault back then, I mean, it's been 30 years. And assault then was like this terrible secret you didn't want anyone to know about. And fortunately, that has drastically changed so much. And we are able now to talk about those things when they happen. But then I didn't. I suffered with grief for a long time. And so this heart for me very much means that I went through something and I survived it and overcame it. And the story of Ava is so dear to me because I really did want to be able to share her story in an honest way and maybe talk to some other girl out there who was going through something similar and help them to not feel so alone. I really hope that girls will read this story and maybe feel that there's someone out there who understands.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and to share Ava with us.
It's my pleasure. It feels like an honor.
Order your signed copy of Cory Anderson's novel, What Beauty There Is, at thenovelneighbor.com. The Novel Neighbor is an indie bookstore located in Webster Groves, Missouri, and features the best selection of young adult literature in the area. This program is brought to you by St. Louis County Library, produced in partnership with HEC Media.